Before I tell you what happened, I want to ask you something. What would you do if someone you loved more than life itself, someone you helped raise with every ounce of your heart, looked you in the eye in front of a crowd and laughed at your gift, called it cheap, while everyone else laughed with them? What would you do if that same person came back days later, smiling sweetly, pretending nothing ever happened, just long enough to get what they wanted? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. For 12 years, I built a future for someone else, one sacrifice at a time, while they built a mask, one lie at a time. And the moment I saw the truth, I smiled and took back the college fund. This is the story of how I went from being invisible to unforgettable. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And if this resonates with you, subscribe, because I have more to tell. Let's not be invisible anymore. Before anything changed, before the painting, the party, the silence, the storm, I lived a small life. Not in the tragic sense, just quiet, predictable. My name is Helen Carter. I'm a widow, an artist, and a grandmother. I've never chased much, never needed to. I lived in a modest little house in Montpelier, Vermont, tucked between whispering trees and a cracked stone driveway that held more memories than I could count. My days were slow and soft. I painted when my hands weren't too stiff. I listened to the wind rattle the window panes and let time pass without urgency. There was no spotlight, no big plans, just me and the ghosts of people I loved, echoing through rooms that once rang with laughter. Most of my days were spent thinking about Madison, my granddaughter, my girl. She was more than just family. She was my second chance at motherhood. Her mother, Lauren, had her young, barely out of high school, juggling 2 jobs and barely able to sleep, let alone raise a baby. So I stepped in. I became Nana, not Grandma, not Granny, just Nana. That name stuck to my heart like a favorite song. Madison and I had our own little world back then. Finger painting in the kitchen, dandelion bouquets wilting in jelly jars. She used to fall asleep in my lap, paint smudged on her cheeks, one hand curled around my necklace like it anchored her. The years passed faster than I expected. One minute she was asking me how to color the sky, and the next she was texting from the other room instead of talking. iPads replaced storybooks. Friends replaced tea parties. Art stopped being magic and started being something she forgot she ever loved. I watched it all from the sidelines, smiling when I had to, crying when no one saw. Still, I loved her, even when she stopped showing up, even when she called only when she needed something. Love doesn't have an off switch, not the kind I gave her. That's why I started the college fund. She had once dreamed of Cal Arts, this beautiful, distant beacon of creativity in California, the kind of school that made stars out of kids who once doodled in the margins. She stopped talking about it eventually. Life swept her into new directions. But I never forgot. Every month, I tucked away what I could. Birthday money, grocery leftovers, skipped haircuts, skipped prescriptions. I told myself it would all be worth it someday. That one day, she'd walk across a campus under the California sun, holding a sketchbook and smiling. And she'd know I helped her get there. That dream kept me going longer than I realized. But dreams have a funny way of dying quietly. I didn't even notice when mine started to fade. I just kept saving, kept hoping. And when her 18th birthday came around, I decided money wasn't enough. I wanted to remind her of who she used to be, of who we used to be. So I painted her something. Not just a painting, a memory. A collage of our best moments. The old swing in the backyard. Our dog Max, who used to chase butterflies. The daffodils outside her bedroom window. I painted until my fingers ached and my vision blurred. Every brushstroke was a prayer she'd remember, that she'd feel something. I wrapped it in brown craft paper and tied it with a white satin ribbon I'd saved from an old gift box. I slipped a small card inside. May your future be as bright as the little girl you used to be. I sat in the driver's seat of my car that morning with the painting in the back seat, my heart full and fragile. I imagined her opening it, her eyes lighting up, maybe even crying. I imagined a hug, maybe a whispered, "I love you, Nana." I imagined wrong. But back then, I didn't know yet. I was still the version of me who believed love was enough. The one who thought that giving meant receiving. That if you gave someone your whole heart, they'd never let it fall. The morning of Madison's party was warm, early June, with just enough breeze to keep the gnats off the windshield. I remember sitting in the car outside her mother's house for nearly 10 minutes, hands resting on the steering wheel, listening to the tick of the cooling engine. The painting was in the back seat, swaddled in soft blankets like something alive. I'd rehearsed the moment over and over in my head, how I'd walk in, how she'd see the ribbon, the way her face would light up when she unwrapped it. I knew there would be other gifts, flashier ones. But mine was different. Mine was made with love. That had to count for something. When I finally walked up the driveway, I was already starting to feel out of place. There was a white linen tent set up on the lawn, the kind you rent for weddings. A DJ booth blared pop music I didn't recognize, and kids milled around in designer outfits, snapping selfies with ring lights and laughing too loudly. I clutched the painting to my chest like a shield. Nobody looked up. Nobody smiled. I spotted Lauren first, near the drinks table. She gave me a quick once-over and forced a polite smile, the kind people give to neighbors they don't really know. "Oh, you made it," she said, like I hadn't watched her daughter grow up in my arms. I tried not to take it personally. I told myself it was just nerves, the noise, the crowd. I nodded and asked where I should place the gift. She waved vaguely toward a table sagging under the weight of glossy boxes and ribboned bags. "Just set it there," she said, already turning back to a conversation. But I didn't move. Something in me resisted the idea of leaving it among all those shiny packages like it was just another item on a registry. No, I wanted to give it to Madison myself. I wanted to look her in the eye, even for just a moment, and let her know this wasn't just a gift. It was a part of me. Madison didn't even notice I was there until someone nudged her and pointed. She looked stunning, grown up in that way young women do when they're trying very hard to look like they belong somewhere more expensive. Her dress was tight, her heels too high, her nails perfect. She gave me a polite little wave, the kind you give to someone you sort of remember from a long time ago. "Nana," she said flatly, walking over. I handed her the gift and smiled. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I whispered. She nodded and walked back to her circle of friends, the package dangling from her hand like an afterthought. When the gift opening started, everyone gathered around. Phones were out, recording. The noise swelled with each expensive item she unwrapped: designer bags, gadgets, a stack of $100 bills fanned out like playing cards. And then she reached for mine. I held my breath. She paused when she saw the paper, the ribbon. "Oh, this one's from my Nana," she said with a small, forced grin. She pulled the paper away and lifted the painting from the box. The laughter didn't wait. It burst out like a balloon popping. "Are you serious?" she said, holding it up like it was a joke. "A painting? That's it?" Someone in the crowd muttered, "Vintage vibes, I guess." Someone else snickered. Madison propped it against the table leg like it was a decoration, not a gift. No one saw my face. That's the thing about being invisible. No one notices when you're hurt. I stood there frozen, hands dangling like dead leaves at my sides, and watched everything around me move on. I thought maybe Lauren would say something, smooth it over. But she just looked away. I turned slowly, walked back to my car in a daze. The wind had picked up a little, tugging at the hem of my cardigan. I sat in the driver's seat, closed the door, and didn't turn the engine on. I just sat there, quiet, still, watching a single tear land on my wedding ring. I'd been wrong. About the gift. About her. About everything. I do not remember how I made it home that night. I was too disconnected from my mind to take note of the drive home. Maybe a good night's sleep would do the magic. Maybe if I slept through this storm, they'd remember not just my gift's worth, but mine. But I was wrong, and I was about to find out. The house was dark when I arrived, and I didn't bother turning on the lights. I just moved through the rooms like a ghost. My purse dropped to the kitchen counter. My shoes slipped off with a thud. I opened the cupboard, took out my chipped teacup, filled it with cold tap water, and sat at the table, our table. The one where I used to help her with spelling tests. The one where she once asked me if heaven had swings, because she wanted Max to be able to run again. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty chair across from me, and for the first time in years, I let silence speak louder than hope. Later that night, I walked down the hallway to the drawer I rarely opened, the one with the college fund folder, thick with printouts, deposits, statements, 12 years of devotion reduced to paper. I opened it with hands that no longer trembled. Then I turned on my old desktop, logged in with the same password I'd used since the beginning. Madison Dream 01. The balance stared back at me, a number built brick by brick from everything I'd let go of, my life in digits. I moved the mouse to the transfer button, not to her fund, not this time. This time, I typed in my own account number. The bar blinked, waiting. I hovered for a moment, then clicked. Transfer complete. That's when I felt it, the smallest, quietest spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Not rage, not relief, something else. Choice. The next morning didn't feel like a new beginning. It felt like a hangover without the alcohol, dull, heavy, and aching in places I didn't know could ache. I moved slowly through the house, unsure if I was walking on solid ground or just drifting through old routines. I fed the cat, even though he'd passed away 3 winters ago. I called out to Max before I remembered he wasn't curled up by the back door. My mind was caught somewhere between habit and grief. I had done something irreversible. I had taken the money back. The fund was empty now, except it wasn't. It was full, only this time it was mine. But I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel proud. I just felt unrecognizable. I made tea, not out of ritual, but to steady my hands. I didn't add honey like I usually did. I didn't deserve sweetness just yet. I sat at the kitchen table, same place I'd sat the night before, staring at the same corner of wood where Madison had once spilled paint and apologized with a shaky lip and a tight hug. Back then, her sorrow was real. Her apologies came wrapped in crayon drawings and sticky fingers. But what she offered now, if you could even call it an offering, was a performance. I knew that now. At least I thought I did. And yet, beneath all the clarity, there was still that awful human ache. I missed her, even after everything. Maybe especially after everything. By noon, I still hadn't changed out of my robe. The house was too quiet, and I was too exhausted to fill it. I moved into the living room, where the painting sat in the corner like a wounded animal. I hadn't touched it since the party. I hadn't even looked at it. Now I did. It leaned against the wall, the brown ribbon still loosely draped across the frame. I walked toward it, crouched down, and slowly peeled the paper away. There it was, our story. The old swing, Max with his tongue lolling, the daffodils brushing up against the frame like they had nowhere else to grow. It was beautiful. and it had been called cheap. A part of me wanted to destroy it, to take a knife to the canvas, tear it to pieces, toss it in the fireplace and pretend it had never existed. But I couldn't. Not because it was art, but because it was real. It was the most honest thing I had to give. And she didn't see it. None of them did. Not really. But I did. I saw every hour I'd spent on that swing, pushing her higher and higher until she squealed with joy. I saw Max chasing butterflies, tail wagging like it was powered by happiness. I saw that little girl who once asked if flowers could dream. They were still mine, those memories, even if she had thrown them away. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. A text. "Hi, Nana. Can I stop by today? Miss you." I stared at the screen for a long time. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, then retreated. "Miss me." That's what she said, like I had simply drifted away, like she hadn't watched me shatter and turned her back. I didn't respond. 2 hours later, she was on the porch. She had cookies from that overpriced bakery downtown, the kind I used to admire through the glass, but never had the spare cash to buy. Her hair was slicked back in a glossy ponytail, her smile too wide, too white. "Nana," she said, like she'd always said it, like it hadn't been months of Helen, or just nothing at all. I let her hug me. My body remembered the movement, but not the warmth. She smelled expensive now. Perfume and shampoo with names I couldn't pronounce. Nothing like the child who used to smell like juice boxes and sidewalk chalk. "I was just thinking about you," she said, stepping inside like no time had passed. I wanted to say sorry for the party. I didn't mean what I said. She sat at the table like she still belonged there, folded her perfect fingers, and looked up at me like forgiveness should be automatic. I stared at her. She was crying, or trying to. I couldn't tell if it was real. I wanted it to be real. God, I wanted it to be real. But there was something in her eyes I couldn't quite trust. A flicker, a hesitation, a gap between words where truth should have lived. She stayed for dinner that night. Madison. She helped chop vegetables like she used to, her delicate hands barely knowing where the knife should go. She talked about school, about friends, about maybe wanting to start painting again. Every word felt like it was dipped in honey, sweet, soft, easy to swallow. She asked about Max, about the old swing, about the time she fell off her tricycle, and I carried her inside like she was made of glass. I laughed at the memory, more from instinct than joy. It felt rehearsed, like we were both reading from some old dusty script. And yet, part of me wanted to believe it. Because what's lonelier than not believing your own family when they say they miss you? We sat at the same table where I once taught her to read, where she used to sneak extra mashed potatoes when she thought I wasn't looking. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I just want to be close to you again, Nana," she said, voice trembling slightly. "I'm not here for the money." I swear I nodded slowly, my lips pressed into a thin line. She smiled. That big 7-year-old smile. The one that used to undo every frustration, every worry. She stayed until after the dishes were washed, until the moonlight spilled over the countertops and made everything look softer than it really was. When she left, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "I love you." I said it back. The words came out on their own, like breath. After she was gone, I walked into the study. The folder was still there. College fund, Madison. I didn't touch it. Not yet. But I stared at it for a long time. Thought about it. Thought about opening the banking portal again. Thought about what it would mean if I put the money back. Thought about whether I had overreacted, if I had been too harsh, if maybe, just maybe, this was her way of making amends. She was young. People make mistakes when they're young. God knows I did. And didn't everyone deserve a second chance? Especially someone you once rocked to sleep with her head on your shoulder and her hand curled into the fabric of your sweater? I wanted her to mean it. That's the thing. I wanted her to be that little girl again. The one who used to call me her best friend. The one who painted crooked hearts on my birthday cards. I didn't want to believe that love could turn cold. That someone raised on kindness could choose manipulation. But wanting something doesn't make it true. And sometimes, the people we raise don't grow up to be who we imagined. Sometimes, they grow into people who learn how to smile through a lie. Sometimes, the children we'd die for become strangers with your heart in their hands, asking for more, even as they crush it. It was a Tuesday when the truth arrived. A forgettable, cloudy afternoon. Madison had come by that morning, bright and cheerful, with her laptop under her arm and a request to print out a scholarship form. "Just one page," she said, dropping her bag on the couch and flashing that smile again. She stayed for lunch, grilled cheese and tomato soup, just like she used to ask for when she had a cold. She left in a rush, off to meet friends, kissed my cheek, said she'd be back soon. I cleaned up, humming a little under my breath, that same old jazz tune we used to dance to in the kitchen. And then, as I walked into the study, I noticed her laptop. Still open, screen glowing. I almost closed it. Almost. But the screen caught my eye. A chat window, still active. Madison chatting with someone named Emmy. I didn't want to look. I did anyway. And there it was, staring at me like a punch I didn't see coming. "Don't worry, she's falling for it. I've been sweet, cried a bit, told her I missed our bond. Classic emotional bait. She always melts with that family crap." My hands went numb, my legs locked beneath me. Another message followed. "Just need a couple more visits. She's already thinking about putting the fund back. Told you she's predictable. I'll be in Cal Arts by fall. Manifesting." My eyes stung, not just from the words, from the familiarity of the betrayal, the deliberate cruelty. She knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't immaturity. This wasn't youth. This was calculated. I wasn't being forgiven. I was being played. I didn't cry. Not at first. I just sat there, staring at the screen, her words burning into me like acid. Classic emotional bait. She always melts. I read them over and over until the words stopped sounding like language and started feeling like noise, sharp, metallic, unbearable. I had known betrayal before. I had felt the sting of being forgotten on holidays, the quiet ache of unanswered texts, the small humiliations of being called too sentimental, too much. But this wasn't quiet. This was deliberate, strategic. She hadn't stumbled into cruelty. She had mapped it out, rehearsed it, weaponized the memories we built together like props in a performance designed to get her what she wanted. My love wasn't enough for her. It was just leverage. My hands trembled as I closed the laptop, gently, like I was sealing away something dead. The room around me felt suddenly foreign, like someone else's house. I had lived in this space for decades, filled it with warmth and stories and small joys, but now it felt stripped bare. I looked at the walls and saw shadows where pictures used to hang. I looked at the rug and saw stains I had once cleaned after juice spills and muddy shoes. All of it, the swing, the daffodils, Max's paw prints in the backyard, it all felt like a lie now, because she had twisted it, rewritten the past into a script she could use against me. What kind of person takes the best parts of your love and turns them into currency? I walked into the kitchen, not sure what I was looking for. I touched the countertops, opened a drawer, closed it again. I couldn't sit. I couldn't cry. My body was buzzing with something more dangerous than sadness. Rage. Not loud, explosive rage. Not the kind that throws things or slams doors. No, This was the quiet kind, the kind that settles in your bones and whispers, "Never again." I stood in the doorway of my studio and looked at the painting, the one she had mocked, called cheap. I walked over to it slowly, like approaching a grave, and pulled the cloth off. There it was, the swing, maximum, the sky. I stared at it, but it didn't hurt anymore. Not in the same way. Because now I knew it wasn't the painting she had rejected. It was me. I whispered to it, not even realizing I had spoken until the words were already in the air. "You're not the one who's worthless, and neither am I." My voice didn't shake. It was calm, sure, almost serene. I picked up my old camera from the bookshelf, blew off the dust, and took a photo of the canvas. Then I went to my computer, the one I barely used anymore except for banking, and logged into a small online community I had once joined years ago for older women artists. I had never posted before, never felt like I belonged. But tonight, I did. In the caption, I wrote, "This painting was called Cheap by someone I love, but it was painted with everything I had left. Every brushstroke is a memory. Every color is a piece of my heart. It wasn't good enough for her, but maybe, somewhere, it'll mean something to someone else." I clicked post. Then I sat in the dark, teacup in hand, the silence pressing in around me. But this time, it didn't suffocate me. It held me, like an old friend. I didn't expect anyone to notice. I didn't post it for attention. I posted it because I needed to reclaim it. Reclaim myself. I had spent too long being quiet, too long giving until there was nothing left, too long believing that love meant being taken for granted. That night, I didn't fall asleep. I drifted into a stillness I hadn't felt in years. Not peace, not yet, but something close. A soft beginning. A crack in the stone where light might enter, if I let it. When I woke the next morning, the sun had already risen, golden and indifferent. I shuffled to the computer to turn it off. But before I could, I saw the screen. Glowing, buzzing, notifications everywhere, messages, comments, shares, likes, dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. I blinked, unsure if I was dreaming. People weren't just reacting, they were feeling, they were crying, they were reaching out. This made me weep. "My grandmother was just like you. Please tell me you sell prints. This isn't cheap, this is love." My painting, the one she called worthless, had found its audience. Not in her, not in that glossy birthday tent, but out here, in the world, with people who saw what she never did. The notifications didn't stop. They poured in like rain through an open window, soaking every corner of my quiet world. I sat at the computer in my robe, hair unbrushed, glasses smudged, watching the numbers climb. Comments, shares, direct messages from strangers, women mostly, but not all, telling me they saw themselves in my story. Mothers who had been dismissed, grandmothers who had been used, daughters who had stopped painting long ago because someone they loved told them their art was pointless. I scrolled through them slowly, each message like a hand on my shoulder, a whisper saying, "I see you. I've been you." One message stopped me cold. It was from a woman named Dana. She said she was a curator at a small gallery in Brooklyn. Her words were short, but they cut through the noise. "Your painting stopped me. Would you consider exhibiting it? I believe it's a story people need to see." I read it 3 times, unsure if I was imagining things. Brooklyn, a gallery, my painting. I felt my breath catch in my throat. For a moment I didn't move, didn't blink. It was like standing on a frozen lake, hearing the first crack of something huge shifting underneath. I replied before I could talk myself out of it. "Yes, I'd be honored. My fingers trembled as I typed, but my voice, when I whispered the words aloud, was steady. That evening, Dana called. Her voice was warm, professional, but touched with something reverent. She told me she wanted to fly in and pick up the piece herself. "I want to treat this painting with the care it deserves," she said. "It's not just a work of art, it's a truth, and people are starving for truth right now." When she asked what the title was, I paused. My mind flicked back to Madison's voice, that laugh, the casual cruelty of it. "Call it The Rejected Gift," I said. Dana was quiet for a beat, then said softly, "Perfect." I hung up the phone and sat in the kitchen, tea forgotten on the counter. I stared at the painting leaning against the wall, half in shadow. The swing, the dog, the daffodils. It looked different now, not because the colors had changed, but because I had. This wasn't just a memory frozen in brushstrokes anymore. It was proof that I had loved, that I had tried, that I had given. It was everything I was told didn't matter, now being seen by people who said it mattered more than they could explain. That night I didn't just sleep, I dreamed. I dreamed in color. Vivid, electric color. Dreams full of galleries and canvases, and people who leaned in close to listen without interrupting. 2 weeks later, I stood in the middle of a sunlit room in Brooklyn, surrounded by people murmuring in soft voices. My hands shook as I entered the gallery. Dana was there, waiting, smiling. "We've had over 300 people come through today," she whispered. "It's the most attention we've gotten all season." I stared at her, stunned. My painting hung on a clean white wall, simply framed, lit with soft warmth. It didn't look like a reject. It looked sacred. People paused in front of it, longer than I expected. Some wiped their eyes. Others just stood still, as if waiting for it to speak. Dana led me to her office in the back, where a printed email sat on the desk. A private collector in Manhattan wanted to buy the piece. $20,000. Cash. I felt like I was floating. My knees nearly gave out. Dana watched my expression carefully. "You don't have to sell it," she said gently. "But if you do, this could fund a new studio, travel, materials, whatever you want. You've got something rare, Helen. Voice, heart. People crave that." For so long I had believed my voice didn't matter, that my heart was something to hide, to soften, to give away in pieces. But standing there, in a gallery with my name on the wall, I realized something. I wasn't invisible anymore. I signed the contract. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the pen, but I got it done. Dana insisted on taking a photo of me with the painting before it left the gallery. "Smile like you mean it," she said. And I did. For the first time in years, I really meant it. Not the polite smile I'd worn at birthdays or holidays, not the one I used to hide how tired I was. This one was real. I wasn't smiling because someone else was happy. I was smiling because I was. Because after a lifetime of giving everything to everyone else, I had finally chosen myself. And the world had chosen me right back. When I returned to Vermont, everything looked the same, but felt completely different. The trees still rustled against the windows. The wind still carried the scent of damp pine and cooling earth. But I wasn't the same woman who had left. I stepped into my house and noticed the silence, but it didn't swallow me this time. It held me. The kind of silence that listens. The kind that welcomes you home. I stood in the middle of my kitchen and stared at the table, where I had once stared down at a chipped teacup, wondering how love could break so quietly. And now, here I was, not broken, reshaped. The emails kept coming, offers, invitations, women from across the country writing to say, "You told my story." A publishing company reached out asking if I'd ever considered writing a memoir. Art magazines wanted interviews. One woman said she wanted to tattoo a piece of the painting on her arm because it reminded her not to disappear. But I didn't chase any of it. I didn't let the rush consume me. Because I wasn't doing any of this to be seen by strangers. I was doing it to finally see myself. Every brushstroke was a homecoming. Every word I spoke now, a reclamation. Lauren called a few days after I got back. Her voice was clipped and curious, the kind of tone people use when they don't want to admit they've been watching from the sidelines. "I saw the gallery post," she said. "People are really talking about you." No congratulations, no warmth, just observation, like I was a report on the evening news. I told her thank you, and not much more. I didn't owe her a recap. I didn't owe her anything. Not anymore. She paused, like she was waiting for me to offer more. When I didn't, she said, "Well, that's great," and hung up. And then Madison showed up. No warning, no call. Just her car pulling into my driveway like it had 100 times before, back when she still believed this house was home. She stood on the porch in a sweatshirt and leggings, face bare, eyes soft in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. I almost didn't answer the door. Part of me wanted to leave her there, outside, with the wind and her regrets. But I opened it. I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, like the air inside was heavier than she remembered. We sat at the table again, where so many chapters of our lives had played out, where truth had once bloomed, where lies had withered and died. "I saw the painting," she said, eyes on her hands. "Online. People are talking about you." She repeated her mother's words like a script they'd both been handed. "I just wanted to say sorry. Again. For the party. For everything." She looked up at me, eyes shining but dry. "I was stupid. And selfish. And I took you for granted. I want to fix things." I didn't say anything. I didn't nod or reach for her hand. I just looked at her. Waited. She shifted in her seat, uncertain for the first time in a long time. "I still want to go to Cal Arts," she admitted. "I know the money's gone. But maybe, if things are different now, maybe you could—" I held up my hand. And in that moment, I saw it. The truth bleeding through the apology. Still chasing the dream. Still chasing me. "You called my love cheap," I said quietly. "You pretended to care so you could get what you wanted. You treated me like a transaction." She opened her mouth, but I kept going. "You lost something that day, Madison. Not money. Not college. You lost the one person who believed in you no matter what." I stood, walked to the door, and opened it. "You want something from me again? Earn it." She stood too, slowly, face unreadable. No hug this time. No apology layered in sweetness. Just silence. She stepped outside, walked to her car, and drove away. A week passed after Madison walked out of my house without saying goodbye. Not a text, not a call, not a knock on the door, or a sudden apology handwritten on a card. Just silence. Then one morning, Lauren showed up. No knock, no text. Just her heels on the porch and the door swinging open like it was still her childhood home, and I was still the woman who folded her laundry and softened every edge life ever threw at her. Her voice came before her face, sharp, angry. "I just came from Madison's," she said. No, hello. No, how are you? No pretense of kindness. I turned from the sink, wiping my hands on a towel, heart already bracing. She stood in the kitchen doorway like an accusation, her blazer stiff, her lipstick perfect, her eyes filled with fury. "She's crying," she snapped. "She says you humiliated her, that you made her feel like trash, that you're throwing her away over a painting." I didn't respond, just stared. She stepped further into the room, She told me about the money, the college fund. You took it back without warning. Still, I stayed quiet. I had learned that silence wasn't weakness. It was control. She hated it. I could see it in the way her jaw tensed. "Do you even know what you're doing?" she asked. "You're sacrificing her future. You're punishing her for being young, for making one mistake." That's when I moved. Slow, steady. I walked to the counter, pulled open the drawer, and held up the thick folder. College fund, Madison. The edges were worn, the label smudged. I held it like a ledger of my life. "This," I said quietly, "is 12 years of my sacrifices. Every coupon I clipped. Every winter I kept the heat low. Every birthday I didn't celebrate for myself, so she could have ballet shoes and art supplies. This is my life." And she spat on it. Lauren opened her mouth, but I wasn't done. She wasn't upset, Lauren. She was cruel. And then she came back, not to apologize, but to perform, to manipulate, to twist love into leverage. I set the folder down, gently, like laying a child to rest. And I almost let her, because I wanted to believe the lie more than I wanted to face the truth. But not anymore. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Truth doesn't scream. It just lands. She stared at me, lips parted, anger faltering beneath what looked suspiciously like guilt. I walked to the desk, pulled out a new folder, crisp, clean, with a label written in thick black marker. Fundo de Libertad, Helen Carter. "I'm using the money now," I said, "not on anyone else. On me." Her eyes widened, just slightly. I saw it, the disbelief, the dawning realization that I was no longer hers to drain, that the well had finally dried up. "I gave you both decades," I said softly. "Now I'm taking a few years back." She stood there, frozen, her expression a tangle of shock and pride and something wounded. "You really won't pay for Cal Arts?" she asked. There was no fight in her voice now, only disbelief. I shook my head once. Firm, final. "I already paid," I said, "with everything I had, and you both threw it away." She didn't say goodbye. She turned and left. I heard her heels click down the porch steps, the car door slam. Then silence again. But this time, I welcomed it. I walked to the kettle, poured a fresh cup of tea. My hands didn't shake. My breath was steady. For the first time in a very long time, the person I had chosen to save was me. They say when one door closes, another one opens. But I don't think that's always true. Sometimes it's not about doors. Sometimes, the walls you've lived within your whole life, walls made of quiet sacrifice and soft-spoken endurance, start to crumble. And only then do you realize that the sky was always waiting. It was late afternoon when the call came, the kind of hour where shadows stretch long and the house starts to hum with that aching quiet that only old homes know. I was sitting by the window with a cup of tea gone cold in my hands, the article from the Chronicle still open on my laptop screen. My name, Helen Carter, typed in elegant serif letters under the title, Late Bloomers. I kept rereading the words like they belonged to someone else, someone distant and brave. But it was my voice there, my truth, printed and published and seen. And somehow, that still hadn't stopped feeling impossible. The phone rang, and I almost didn't answer it. The number wasn't saved, and I'd grown used to letting the unknown go to voicemail. But something nudged me, a quiet instinct. I pressed the green button and held the phone to my ear. "Hello? Is this Helen Carter?" The voice on the other end was soft, female, laced with a French accent that rolled gently, like waves. "My name is Marianne. I'm calling from Atelier Lumière, an art collective based in Paris." I froze. "I saw your painting, The Rejected Gift, and your story." We'd be honored to feature your work in our upcoming exhibit. It's a traveling show across Europe, focused on female artists reclaiming space, telling truths that were once dismissed. She paused, then added, almost reverently, "Your painting? It stopped me. You stopped me." My throat tightened. Paris. A gallery in Paris wanted me. Not because I was someone's grandmother, not because I had sacrificed, but because I had spoken, because I had created something that touched a stranger an ocean away. "Yes," I said, the word barely more than a breath. "Yes, I'd be honored." After we hung up, I set the phone down carefully and just sat there. My heart thudded softly against my ribs, not in fear, but in awe. I looked around my living room, threadbare curtains, a couch older than Madison, books stacked sideways on sagging shelves. Nothing about this place screamed ambition or fame. But now, somehow, my quiet, invisible story was being carried across continents. Not as a sob story, not as a tragedy, but as art. I whispered aloud to the room, "They see me." And the walls, which had witnessed my giving and my grief, seemed to whisper back, "Finally." I didn't tell Lauren. I didn't call Madison. I didn't send a postcard or an update. They could find out like everyone else. Through the noise, through the ripples. If they were still watching, they'd know. But I wasn't performing anymore. I wasn't holding out my heart for inspection or praise. This was mine. The flight to Paris was long, and I was older than I had been when I last traveled, but something in me felt lighter than it had in decades. The plane lifted into the sky and I thought, this is what leaving with nothing feels like, and gaining everything. When I landed, a young woman from the collective greeted me with flowers and a driver. She treated me like I mattered, like I wasn't a relic of someone else's story, but the author of my own. The gallery was nestled on a quiet street near the Seine, sunlight spilling in through tall windows that turned dust into glitter. My painting hung at the center of a clean white wall. Underneath it, a simple placard, "The Rejected Gift, Helen Carter, USA." People filtered in slowly at first. Then they lingered, and lingered longer. Some took pictures, some cried. One woman clutched her chest and whispered to her friend, "That was my mother." I didn't speak much that night. I didn't need to. My voice was already there, stitched into every brushstroke. Later, I stood beside the curator, watching the crowd move like waves. "You've given something important," she said. "Not just art, permission, for women to feel everything they've swallowed." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. Tears pressed against the corners of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not because I was holding back, but because I was whole. There was nothing left to mourn, only space left to grow. That night, I walked alone along the river. The lights of the city reflected off the water like broken gold. I didn't rush. I didn't reach for my phone. I just walked, breathing in the scent of stone and stories, feeling more alive than I ever had in my youth. I sat at a cafe near the bridge and ordered a glass of wine. A man played violin nearby. Children ran past. And I, Helen Carter, once invisible, once dismissed, smiled into the dusk. No longer waiting to be chosen. No longer asking to be loved. I had chosen myself. And that, finally, was enough. I came back from Paris to a house that no longer felt like a place I was waiting in. It felt like mine again. Not just where I lived, but where I belonged. The floors still creaked, the cabinets still stuck, the porch still sighed in the wind like an old man settling into a rocking chair. Nothing about the structure had changed, but something inside me had. The woman who had once stood by these windows hoping to be remembered was gone. And in her place was someone new. someone who didn't ask to be seen anymore, because she already was. I unpacked slowly. I took my time. I hung a small framed photo of the Paris gallery beside the kitchen table, right where Madison used to sit with a bowl of cereal, her hair tangled from sleep, her eyes wide and curious. She had drawn rainbows at that table, scribbled dreams in crayon, told me I was her favorite person in the whole world. I didn't take the photo down. I left it there. I didn't need to erase the good to honor the pain. The beauty was still real. The memories were still mine. But I no longer needed them to justify the years I'd spent sacrificing everything for everyone else. They were not a currency to buy love with. They were simply part of me. I painted every day, not always with intention. Sometimes just to feel color under my fingers, to remember that I was capable of creating something out of nothing. A woman's face appeared again and again on the canvas, always slightly different. Sometimes proud, sometimes wounded, but always standing, always whole. I didn't paint Madison anymore. I didn't paint the swing or the daffodils, or Max chasing butterflies across the lawn. I didn't need to immortalize what no longer held me. I was done preserving a love that had demanded too much and returned too little. But life has a way of circling back, even when you think you've finally stepped free of its loops. A few months after the Paris exhibit, I received a letter in the mail. The envelope was plain, the handwriting familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten before I even opened it. Madison. Her name written carefully, like she was trying to impress me with neatness, like she thought tidy letters could undo what messy choices had done. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter unopened in my hands, for nearly 20 minutes. I wasn't afraid, just tired. But eventually, I peeled it open. The letter was short, just a single page. "Nana," it began, "I can't undo the hurt I caused you, and I'm not asking for anything. I've been working on myself. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I do want to say I'm sorry. I've been selfish, and I regret how I treated you. I hope one day you'll see me differently. Love, Madison." I read it twice, slowly, letting each word sit for a second before moving on. There was no manipulation this time, no ask, no hidden hook behind the apology. It didn't reach out for money or guilt or sympathy. It just existed. A whisper, not a plea. And still, I didn't cry. I didn't feel that old ache rise up in me, begging to be soothed with false hope. I felt still, like I had stood in the middle of a storm and come out the other side, soaked and bruised but still standing. The letter didn't undo what she'd done, but it didn't need to, because I no longer needed her to be someone she wasn't. I had stopped expecting love from people who didn't know how to give it freely. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in the drawer where I once kept the college fund folder. That drawer, once bloated with sacrifice, was nearly empty now, except for that letter and a few clippings from my exhibitions. The money was gone, but the weight was gone too. I didn't need to hold it anymore, and I didn't need to carry Madison's redemption like it was mine to protect. In the months that followed, I traveled more than I ever had in my life. I returned to Europe, Spain, Italy, Switzerland. I painted in sunlit courtyards and learned to ask for directions in broken French. I got lost on purpose. I let strangers become friends and let moments pass without trying to memorize them. I laughed with my whole chest. I danced when no one else was dancing. And in a quiet plaza in Seville, I met someone. A man. Older than me, with a weathered face and eyes that looked like they had cried without shame. His name was Thomas. He was an artist too. We talked for hours. Not about who we had been, but about who we were now. There was no performance, no soft lies to seduce comfort, just honesty, grief, curiosity. He didn't ask me to become anything for him. He didn't need me to fill a hole in his life. He had already done that work. And so had I. When we parted, there was no promise. Just a gentle, "I hope our paths cross again." And for once, I didn't cling. I didn't beg the moment to stay. Because I finally understood, I wasn't incomplete. Back in Vermont, the seasons were shifting again. The trees wore gold, like they were proud of growing old, and the wind had that sharp edge that whispered of winter coming. I stood on the porch one morning wrapped in a shawl I'd knitted years ago, before Paris, before the letter, before I had a name people Googled. I held a mug of hot tea between my hands, steam curling into the air, and watched the leaves fall. It should have felt ordinary, but nothing in my life felt ordinary anymore. The light even looked different now, warmer somehow, like it was filtering through a lens I hadn't known I needed. The house felt new too, not because it had changed, but because I had. It wasn't a holding space anymore. It wasn't where I waited to be needed. It was mine. Every wall, every cracked tile, every floorboard that groaned underfoot belonged to me in a way it never had when I was living only for others. My days weren't empty now. They were full in ways that didn't need explaining. Mornings spent painting, afternoons reading or walking the trails near the creek. Evenings by the fire, my cat curled against my leg, Billie Holiday low in the background. It was a life, a good one. Not big, not loud, but mine. I started a new series of paintings. Women again, always women, but this time they weren't reaching or bending or waiting. They stood. They held their ground. Some had their eyes closed, faces tilted toward the sky like they trusted whatever was coming. Some stood with their backs turned, walking into the unknown with their heads high. I didn't paint sadness anymore. I painted reclamation. I painted the moment after the goodbye, the second when grief gives way to grace, when the silence you feared becomes the song you sing. I filled canvases with strength disguised as softness, boldness wrapped in calm. The requests kept coming in. Galleries, interviews, art schools asking if I'd speak to their students. A small museum in Canada wanted to feature freedom as part of their winter exhibit. I said yes. Not because I needed the validation, but because the world kept telling me something I had only just begun to believe, that my voice mattered, that the truth I carried had weight, not because it was dramatic or tragic, but because it was real, because it had been lived, not performed. And people, it turns out, are desperate for something real. And then, one afternoon, while sorting through emails and planning my next trip, I opened a message that made me stop breathing for just a moment. It was from a school in California, California Institute of the Arts, the very school I had once quietly saved for, the very dream I had nearly destroyed myself trying to fund. They had seen my work. They wanted to feature the rejected gift in an upcoming seminar on emotional narrative in visual art. They wanted to study it, not dismiss it, not laugh at it, not toss it aside like something cheap and homemade. They wanted to understand it. I didn't cry when I read it. I thought I might. But instead, I smiled. I looked around the room, the soft light spilling through the windows, the worn armchair in the corner, the latest canvas drying near the fire. This was full circle. This was the universe handing me the very thing I had once begged someone else to see. Not for her. For me. For every woman who had been told her art, her love, her heart was too small to matter. I typed my reply slowly, intentionally. I'd be honored to participate. Thank you for recognizing the value in what was once rejected. That night, I opened a fresh journal. I hadn't written in years, not privately. But the words came without effort. I wrote about being a woman who gave too much, about the ache of invisibility, about the quiet joy of taking your life back. I didn't know where the writing would go. I didn't care. It wasn't for anyone else's eyes. It was for the woman I used to be. The one who had waited by the phone, who had stood in the shadows at birthday parties, who had whispered her love and hoped it would echo back. She was gone now, not in bitterness, but in growth. I didn't need to be needed anymore. I didn't need applause. I just needed truth. And I finally had it. In every color, every stroke, every silent, steady breath. My name was Helen Carter, and I was no longer waiting to be seen. It was strange, the way life kept opening. Even after all the doors I thought had slammed shut, even after I'd convinced myself the best chapters had already been written, something kept pulling me forward. Not with urgency, but with quiet, undeniable momentum. I didn't resist it anymore. I let myself be moved. I stopped asking why now and simply whispered thank you. The invitations kept coming. A gallery in London, an interview with a women's publication that had once ignored my emails, an arts foundation asking if I'd mentor younger women starting their own journeys. And I said yes. Not because I wanted attention, but because I had learned what it meant to finally take up space. One foggy morning in October, I found myself standing inside a grand old building in London, the kind of gallery with marble floors and ceilings that made you feel both small and timeless. My painting hung again, The Rejected Gift, still framed simply, still glowing under soft light. It never stopped surprising me, how that one moment of pain had bloomed into this. People moved past it slowly, reading the placard, pausing longer than they did for anything else in the room. I stood nearby, half hidden in the crowd, a visitor in my own story. A young woman approached me, not realizing who I was, and whispered to her friend, This one hurts in the best way." I turned away before they could see my face. Not because I was hiding, but because the emotion rose in me so suddenly, so deeply, it felt sacred. I stepped outside into the cold air and leaned against the railing, watching the river slip by like time itself. It was there that I let myself finally weep. Not from sorrow, from recognition. I had spent so many years begging to be noticed, to be understood, to be held gently by someone else's gaze. And now the world wasn't just looking, they were feeling. They were holding pieces of me with care. That painting, once laughed at, once abandoned at the foot of a birthday table, had become a kind of mirror. And through it, women were seeing their own bruised hearts and realizing they still beat. The gallery offered to buy the piece, not for $20,000 like before, but for twice that, $40,000. The curator asked gently if I was ready to let it go for good. I looked at the painting one last time and smiled. "She was never mine," I said. "She belongs to everyone now." We shook hands. The deal was done. The painting would stay in London, a permanent part of their collection. Proof, they said, of how art born from truth could outlive the wounds that made it. When I returned to Vermont, I brought back only my luggage and a quiet sense of reverence. The house welcomed me like an old friend. The cat jumped onto my lap the second I sat down. My porch creaked in greeting as the wind rolled through the trees. But I wasn't the same woman who had once stared out those windows, waiting for a call that never came. I was full now, rooted. And yet, I kept growing. A week after my return, I received a handwritten letter. Not from Madison, from a woman named Eleanor, who lived in Oregon. She was 73, a widow, a poet. Her daughter hadn't spoken to her in 4 years. She wrote, "When I saw your painting, I didn't feel alone anymore. I printed it out and taped it above my writing desk. It reminded me that we don't love wrong. Sometimes people just receive us wrong, and that's not our burden to carry." I read that line 3 times, tears falling silently. We don't love wrong. How many years had I spent questioning whether I had? Wondering if I was too much, too quiet, too hopeful. It had never been the love that failed. It was just the direction I gave it to. I started painting again the next morning. A new piece. Bigger than anything I'd done before. A woman with her arms outstretched, standing not in a room or a memory, but in the middle of a wide open field. Her face to the sky. Her eyes closed, but her body wide awake. Around her, wind moved in waves. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was claiming space, letting the earth hold her, without apology. I didn't name it right away. I let her exist without title. Because some things don't need to be defined. Some things are powerful simply because they are. That night, I sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. My tea had long gone cold in my hands, but I didn't care. I thought of the woman I had been. The woman who gave everything away so people would stay. Who believed love was something you earned by shrinking. Who waited for doors to open that never would. I loved her. I forgave her. And I let her go. It had been nearly a year since the birthday party. Since the laugh. Since the cruel little moment that cracked something I'd spent decades protecting. And I wasn't keeping track to feel bitter. I didn't need anniversaries to remember pain. It lived in the rhythm of things. The way I'd once checked my phone every night before bed, hoping for a message. The way I used to plan meals hoping someone might stop by. The way I kept that college fund folder in the drawer, neat and pristine, like it wasn't slowly draining the life out of me. All of that was gone now. All of it had been cleared away, like dead leaves swept from the porch. I hadn't seen or heard from Madison since the letter, and I hadn't gone looking. I had spent so long trying to preserve her image in my heart, trying to keep the sweetness of her childhood alive, like it could outweigh what came after. But eventually you learn, you can't hold on to the same photograph forever, without noticing how faded it becomes. I'd stopped squinting at the past, hoping to find something good in what had clearly gone. But even so, when her name appeared on my caller ID one cold Saturday morning, something inside me stilled. Not fear, not hope, just stillness. A pause in the air. Breath that hadn't been taken in a long time. She didn't say much on the phone, just that she was in town, that she'd like to stop by, that she wouldn't stay long. Her voice was different, smaller. I told her she could come. Not because I needed her to, not because I thought anything would be fixed, but because I wasn't afraid of what she might say anymore. When the doorbell rang, I opened it calmly. She stood there, her coat too big for her frame, eyes shadowed with the kind of tired you can't cover with makeup. She looked older than 19. She looked like someone who had been learning, the hard way, what it means to be responsible for your own mess. She stepped inside, but didn't sit right away. She wandered into the kitchen like she used to when she was little, running her fingers along the edge of the table, looking at the photographs still hanging on the wall. There was a silence between us that didn't beg to be filled. I waited. I always had. But this time I wasn't waiting for her to be different. Just honest. "I saw your new painting," she said after a while. "The one with the woman in the field." Her voice cracked slightly. "I knew it was you, even before I read the title." She sat down slowly, looked at her hands. "You painted freedom." Her eyes met mine. "You didn't paint me." I nodded. There was no cruelty in it, just truth. "No," I said. "I didn't." She swallowed hard, and for a moment, I saw the girl she had been, the one who used to crawl into my bed at night after a bad dream. "I didn't come to ask for anything," she said. I needed you to know I'm sorry. For the birthday, for the lie, for what I wrote to Emmy, for using you like that. I was stupid and selfish, and I thought if I said the right words, I could make you give it all back. But I knew what I was doing. I just didn't think you'd ever walk away." My chest tightened, not with pain, but with memory. Of course she hadn't thought I'd walk away. I never had. I'd been the one who stayed, who cleaned up, who made excuses, who gave until there was nothing left. But this time, I had walked. Not because I stopped loving her, but because I started loving myself. And that's what she finally saw. "I believe you're sorry," I said. "And I don't hate you. But I'm not going back. I can't." She nodded. A slow, solemn nod that looked like it hurt. "What I gave you all those years," I said, "it wasn't about money. It was belief. I believed in you when you forgot how to believe in yourself. And when you used that belief against me, you didn't just lose access to a fund. You lost me." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't beg. She didn't defend herself. She just listened. I saw her hands clench into fists in her lap, then slowly loosen. "I know," she whispered. We sat in silence for a while after that. No music, no small talk. Just two people finally understanding the full weight of everything unsaid. When she stood to leave, she paused at the door and turned back. "I hope one day I can earn my way back into your life," she said. "But I understand if I never do." I walked her out, watched her car disappear down the road. I didn't cry. I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel triumphant either. I just felt rooted, like someone who had chosen the ground beneath her feet for the first time in a lifetime. The wind picked up as I turned back toward the house, and in that moment, I realized something simple and profound. I had finally stopped chasing closure. I had become it. The next few days moved slowly, like the world was exhaling with me. There was no dramatic change in the air, no bolt of clarity or euphoric moment of healing. Just the gentle quiet that comes after you finally speak the truth out loud and realize nothing broke when you did. I went about my routines, tea in the morning, brush in hand by noon, soft music filling the space where guilt used to live. Madison's visit had stirred something deep, but not in the way it once would have. There was no reopening of wounds, just the confirmation of something I already knew. I had made the right choice. She didn't try to rewrite the story this time. She just stood in it. And I let her. But I didn't hand her the pen. The letter she wrote months ago stayed where I'd placed it, in the drawer beside the folded college fund documents and the receipts I'd once hoarded like artifacts of love. I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. I had already memorized the shape of those words, the way they came from a place of reflection rather than manipulation. But a letter is not a time machine. It's not a key to unlock the doors we closed to save ourselves. It's just an echo, a gesture. And sometimes that's all it can be. I started a new canvas the next morning. It came to me before I even picked up the brush. An image of a woman walking away from a burning bridge. Not running, not frantic, just steady. Her back straight, her dress catching the wind. The bridge behind her wasn't crumbling from hate or anger. It was fire made of clarity, of final decisions, of light. I painted until my hands ached, and even then I didn't stop. I let the feeling move through me, every color a release, every stroke a promise. I would never give myself away piece by piece again. A week later, I held my first local showing in town. It was small, nothing like Paris or London, but it felt more intimate, more mine. The gallery was nestled in the corner of an old building, its windows smudged and floors scuffed from decades of footsteps. I loved it instantly. There was no performance here, just truth, just raw edges and warm lighting. The town came out for it, more than I expected. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years stopped me in front of my work, their eyes glossy with unshed tears. Women gripped my hands tightly, like they were afraid to let go. One of them whispered, "Thank you for saying what so many of us couldn't." And then, near the end of the evening, a girl, no more than 20, stood in front of the burning bridge painting, completely still. She had her arms wrapped around her body, like she was trying to hold herself together. I approached quietly. She didn't look at me right away, just kept staring. Finally, she said, "I didn't know someone else had felt this." Her voice trembled. "I left my mother's house last year. I still don't know if I did the right thing. But this," she pointed to the painting, "this makes me feel like maybe I did." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I put a hand gently on her shoulder. "Leaving doesn't mean you stopped loving," I said. "Sometimes it just means you started loving yourself too." She nodded, eyes full now. She didn't need me to explain the story behind the canvas. She already knew it, because it was hers too. That's the magic of truth. It doesn't need a biography. It just needs to be felt. When the night ended and the last guest left, I stood alone in the middle of the gallery, surrounded by the versions of myself I had painted over the past year. Every one of them had survived something. Every one of them had let go of something they once thought they couldn't live without. And none of them looked like victims. They looked like women who had stepped into their lives without asking for permission anymore. I didn't turn the lights off right away. I let them burn a little longer, casting soft gold across the canvas faces of all the women I had become. I walked slowly to the burning bridge painting and traced the edge of the frame with my fingers. I didn't title it on the wall. I'd left it blank for the viewer to name for themselves. But in my head, I finally whispered it. Departure. Not because I was walking away from something, but because I had arrived. And that, finally, was the point. It had started to snow again. The kind of slow, deliberate snowfall that felt less like weather and more like grace. Quiet, steady, soft enough to rewrite the world without asking for permission. I stood at the window that morning, fingers wrapped around a mug of coffee, watching the flakes gather on the railings of the porch. The world looked clean, undisturbed. And for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged in that kind of stillness. Not waiting, not worrying, just existing, with nothing left to prove. It was strange how the peace came. Not like a wave, not like a triumph, but like something earned, fought for. It settled into my bones like warmth after frost. I had lived most of my life shrinking into corners, dimming my joy, softening my voice so others wouldn't leave. I gave until giving became identity. I became the woman who showed up, who stayed quiet, who never asked for anything in return. But now, I was different. Not louder, not harder, just whole. And I didn't apologize for that anymore. The requests to speak at events kept coming. A conference in New York, a virtual panel on generational caregiving, a radio interview about women who bloom late and fiercely. I said yes to a few, no to most. Not because I wasn't honored, but because I no longer mistook opportunity for obligation. I gave when it felt right, when it felt real. The rest, I let pass by like clouds. I didn't need to climb anything anymore. I had already arrived. One night, I was sitting by the fire with a book I wasn't really reading, the flames low and steady, the cat stretched out across my feet like an old friend. I thought about what it meant to be known, not by the world, not by admirers or curators or art blogs, but by yourself. To sit in your own company and not flinch. To be alone without being lonely. That was the gift the pain had given me. The betrayal, the silence, the laughter over my painting. It had all forced me back into my own arms. And for once, I didn't drop myself when I got there. I still painted every day, Not to heal, not to make sense of anything, but because it had become the way I prayed. Each canvas held something sacred, a truth, a scar, a reclamation. I stopped needing each piece to say something. Sometimes the colors were enough. Sometimes the shape of a woman looking toward the sea, her hands at her sides, told a story no words could reach. I didn't ask these women who they were anymore. I just let them be. I had learned that freedom doesn't always look like joy. Sometimes it looks like silence without ache, like space, like breathing without needing permission. I started putting together a collection. I didn't know if it would become a book or a gallery series, or just a folder on my desktop that no one ever saw. I titled it, Things I Never Said Out Loud. And each painting was a sentence, a confession, a small, stubborn truth. There was one of a girl reaching out to a woman who had already turned away. Another of a table with one chair pulled out, still waiting. Another of hands unclenched, finally releasing something unseen. I didn't paint Madison, but I painted what loving her had taught me, and what letting her go had healed. One afternoon, I got a call from Thomas, the artist I'd met in Spain. His voice, still gentle, still measured like a man who had made peace with his past, filled the phone with ease. We talked for over an hour, about his latest sculpture, about the weather, about the strange, steady grace of becoming older and less afraid. He didn't ask if I missed him. I didn't ask if he was coming back. There was no performance between us, just presence. And it was enough. Before we hung up, he said softly, "I hope the world is still listening to you." I smiled. "It is," I said. "But more importantly, I'm still listening to myself." That night, I sat on the porch, the snow still falling in slow, golden layers under the porch light. I didn't need anything from the world. Not applause, not validation, not even understanding. I had found something better than being seen. I had found what it meant to see myself, not through anyone else's eyes, but my own. And in that quiet, snowy dark, with my coat pulled close and my heart steady, I realized I hadn't just survived the past year. I had been reborn inside it. Spring came slowly, like it always does in Vermont, cautiously, almost shy. One warm day, then 3 cold ones. Crocuses blooming through frost-bitten soil. Snow melting in patches, revealing last autumn's forgotten leaves like buried stories. But I felt it, deep in my chest. The shift, the thaw. Not just in the weather, but in myself. There was no grand moment, no single turning point. Just a gentle awareness. A quiet truth I couldn't ignore anymore. I wasn't surviving now. I was living. I woke early most mornings, before the sun had fully risen, and sat on the porch with my tea. Not because I needed the ritual to feel grounded anymore, but because I liked the way the world looked when it was still figuring itself out for the day. Mist curling around the trees, birds testing out their voices, everything slow and unsure and beautiful in its own right. That's how I felt too. Not finished, not polished, but real, honest, whole in a way I'd spent most of my life reaching for in other people. I painted more than ever, but I stopped worrying about whether the paintings would sell, or whether they were good enough for a gallery. I wasn't trying to prove anything. Each canvas was a conversation between who I had been and who I was becoming. The colors were bolder now, less afraid. I painted women with soft bellies and strong backs, with hands that had held too much and eyes that had seen too far. I painted them dancing in kitchens, standing in fields, leaning against doorframes like they were holding up the world. I painted what it felt like to be invisible and to reclaim that invisibility as power, not as punishment. One day, I was organizing some old sketchbooks in the studio when I came across a stack of Madison's early drawings. They were rough and bright, and completely without fear. A crooked sun, a horse with 6 legs, a little girl with arms too long, and a heart scribbled on her chest. On the back of one, in her handwriting, she had written, "To Nana, because you love everything I make." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Let the words roll over me like warm water. I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I just felt gratitude. That once, there was love. That once, we were everything to each other. That even if we couldn't find our way back to that version of us, it had been real. And real things don't disappear. They live on in the marrow, in the memory, in the brushstrokes. I slid the drawing into a fresh folder, labeled it simply, "What Was True." It wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't a longing. It was a form of respect for the love that raised her and the woman who gave it. I didn't need to rewrite the story. I didn't need to find a happy ending. The story didn't need to be happy to be worth telling. It just had to be mine. That evening, I got an email from a woman I didn't know. She'd attended one of my showings, said she hadn't stopped thinking about a piece I'd titled Reclamation. It was a painting of a woman standing barefoot in a flooded room, the water rising around her but not touching her mouth, her eyes wide open, daring it to rise higher. "It felt like you had painted my divorce," the woman wrote. "Like you'd been in the room with me when I packed up my life and left with nothing but a spine and a suitcase." I read the email twice, then a third time, and I felt something deep in me stretch, something that had been silent for a long, long time. I realized then that my life, once so small, so contained within the needs of others, had become something that reached strangers. Not because I set out to be important, but because I stopped asking for permission to exist. The sun dipped below the hills outside my window, casting long shadows on the hardwood floor. I stood in the doorway of my studio, paint on my palms, and looked at the canvas I'd just begun. It was still mostly blank, save for one curve of a shoulder, the beginning of a face turned toward the light. I didn't know who she would become yet, but I wasn't afraid of her becoming. I was curious, and maybe, finally, that was enough. I didn't need a final word, no grand closing statement, just the knowledge that I had lived, that I had given and lost and given again, but now on my own terms. My story wasn't tied to who stayed or who didn't, who laughed or who finally apologized. My story was tied to the woman who looked at the wreckage and didn't just walk away from it, she painted her way through it. And that, I thought, watching the last light slip beneath the trees, was what it meant to be free. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand how something as small as a painting, one canvas, a few quiet memories, could be the thing that unraveled everything I thought I knew and stitched me back together in a way that finally felt whole. I spent most of my life giving time, giving forgiveness, giving love to people who didn't always know what to do with it. And for a long time, I believed that made me good. That if I gave enough, stayed kind enough, stayed small enough, I would be loved back the way I deserved. But love given from an empty place isn't love, it's survival. And what I've learned, painfully and beautifully, is that surviving isn't the same as living. Living asks you to choose yourself. Living asks you to stop waiting for the apology, the recognition, the phone call. It asks you to get up anyway, to make your tea, to write your name on your own life and stop erasing it for the comfort of others. I never got the version of Madison I hoped for. Maybe I never will. I stopped measuring my worth by her growth, stopped asking her choices to justify my sacrifices. She has her path, and I have mine. And sometimes love means letting go, not to punish, but to protect the pieces of yourself that took too long to gather. The woman I am now doesn't look anything like the woman who wrapped a handmade painting in brown paper and satin ribbon and walked into that party with hope in her hands. She's not softer. She's not harder either. She's clearer. She's awake. And she knows the difference between love and longing, between silence and peace. If you've ever been where I was, standing in a room full of people, holding something that means everything to you while they laugh, know this: it doesn't end there. That moment may shape you, but it does not define you. What defines you is what you do next. The quiet decision to choose yourself. The steady walk back to your own heart. I am not bitter. I am not broken. I am not waiting. I am still here. And I am mine. We're grateful you stayed with us. For more stories of women reclaiming their voice, click on the left and subscribe to stay connected. May this be a reminder. Your story has power too.